Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of Planet Waves TV. My name is Eric Francis, an astrologer reporting in from Kingston, New York, and I have some news for you today about Mars retrograde. Mars retrograde happens every 2 years, and we're about to have one now that begins on April 17th and that ends on June 29th. It is one of those events that is a defining thing in the year that we live in, so this is the year of the Mars retrograde in Scorpio and in Sagittarius, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. First, let's talk about Mars. Ta-da! Mars is the planet of, get that right, desire, passion, sex, ambition, impulse, anger, fear. I've chosen a drumstick as my pointer to represent Mars. And Mars is, you might say, the planet of energy. It's the planet that powers the biopsychic system from a symbolic standpoint, right? So it's not actually this red planet in space that is giving you energy and impulse and desire and all that. Rather, this is the thing that Mars symbolizes, or the group of things that Mars symbolizes in your chart, the confluence of things. Mars is handed down to us from Roman mythology as the god of war, and it ends up transposed through various layers of psychology and mythology and the wonders of ancient astrology as associated essentially with anything energized, aggressive, assertive, driven by want, need, and all that, right? So the important thing to remember, Mars is the planet of maleness, but everyone has Mars in his or her chart. All men, all women, and in this way, astrology is fundamentally egalitarian. It understands that on one level, we're all made of the same exact stuff, the same exact elements in our psyche. The thing about Mars is that, oops, that didn't work that well. Mars is the planet of maleness, but Mars has a pussy. It's called the Valle Marinaris. It is 4,000 kilometers long, 2,200 kilometers wide, and 7 kilometers, 23,000 feet deep. That is long, wide, and deep. And I've made a picture of it for you. I was just up there a minute ago. Okay, so now imagine this being like 2,500 miles across, this huge, ginormous canyon on Mars. And it is considered one of the largest canyons in our solar system. There's supposedly a bigger one on Earth, but I can't imagine that it's longer and wider and deeper than the Valle Marinaris on Mars. So this is a little cosmic joke saying that there's maleness inside of femaleness and femaleness inside of maleness. And we have more in common than we think we have. Let's take a look at some astrology charts here, since that's what we're here talking about. This is the chart for Mars stationing retrograde. Excuse me, I'm using a new type of camera thing, and like left and right are really weird, and I'm not really good at this whole video thing. I'd rather just sort of sit behind the microphone. Okay, so Mars. See that? Mars is at 8 degrees and 54 minutes of Sagittarius. That's a Sagittarius sign. It's awfully close to Saturn. This will be on April 17th, by the way. It's awfully close to Saturn, which is spending almost 3 years in Sagittarius, and we're right about approaching the middle of that length of time. Okay, so Mars starts its retrograde in Sagittarius, and it's very close to that degree now. Normally, planets would go in this direction, but instead, because the Earth is passing between the Sun and Mars, that's how retrogrades happen, is a planet either passes between the Sun and the Earth, or the Earth passes between the Sun and that planet. It creates this retrograde effect, which is essentially either the planet going by or the Earth going by, depending on which planet it is. For example, with Mercury, Mercury passes in between the Earth and the Sun. Venus passes between the Earth and the Sun. For all the planets more distant than the Earth must pass between them and the planet. And that is the case with Mars, when Mars is retrograde. So this partly means, first of all, you can see Mars up in the night sky. It'll be pretty much opposite where the sun is. So you'll see it basically as soon as it gets dark. Mars will be up in the sky, and then as Mars and the sun approach opposition, they'll be exactly opposite one another, and Mars will be high in the sky basically all summer. And you can recognize it because it's brighter than a star, and it has an orange hue, kind of like the color of my t-shirt, only a bit darker, and it's Mars. You can tell that it's Mars, and Jupiter's really easy to spot too. And Jupiter, is Jupiter in the neighborhood? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if Jupiter's visible right now. All right, so in any event, let's see. Mars will retrograde, and it's going to retrograde here from early Sagittarius into Scorpio here. And when Mars is all done being retrograde, it's going to wind up in Scorpio. So it started here, and then it's going to go back in a straight line, not a crooked line, to there. And that is right after the summer solstice on June the 29th. Now, what is this all about? So we know that Mars retrograde is beginning in Sag. And Mars in Sag is like the ultimate sign of spiritual seeking and spiritual questing, the combination of that fact. And when we turn Mars retrograde, that brings it toward an internal reality, first of all. So retrogrades all point within. Retrogrades point toward the past. That's a really important thing. And they are a kind of a review phase, and they're kind of an interior investigation, an interior inquiry into what we have going on inside. And so if we go back to our list of all the things that Mars is about here, my graphics are not quite up to the level of the Rachel Maddow show yet, but we'll get there. Passion, desire, sex, ambition, impulse, anger, and fear. This is an inquiry into all of those things. And it begins on what we think of as the spiritual level of Sagittarius, because Sagittarius is about all things that we think of as being exotic or being cosmic or being based in belief in some way. There are elements of religion, there are elements of spirituality involved in Sagittarius. And normally with Mars and Sag, we would, for example, in a natal chart, it would be a person who were an active seeker, quester. You like to go to sacred places like anything Sagittarius. With Mars going in reverse, coming inward toward us and on an inner quest, that becomes a kind of a search for soul, an inquiry into what you believe and why you believe it, and an inquiry into your motives. This is one of the most important factors of Mars retrograde is understanding your motives and why you want what you want, in addition to being really real with yourself about what you want. And we know there's huge conflict about what we want in the world. We're pumped up on desire by advertising. We're pumped up on desire by numerous factors in our world, and then yet at the same time, we're often not happy when we get what we want. We're taught to feel guilty for wanting, guilty for having, and so there is a lot of conflict. And I believe that guilt is often a Mars factor turned inward on itself. And so if you're dealing with anger, guilt, resentment of any kind, this is a great time to make an inquiry. But here's the really interesting part, in my opinion. This retrograde spans 2 signs. And retrogrades don't need to span 2 signs. Sometimes they all happen in one sign. I believe the last one happened exclusively in Libra, and we're going to review that one as part of our Planet Waves kind of analysis of this, and I have an article that goes back over lots of recent Mars retrogrades, going back like 30 or 40 years. We'll publish that as well. This Mars retrograde begins in Sagittarius, the sign of spirituality and belief, and it goes back into Scorpio, the sign of genetics, emotions, sex, and death. So we have something that starts as one thing and it ends as something related, but what I would call deeper in. And one of the things about retrograde planets is because they go backwards, we get a chance to have an experience of treading the wheel in reverse. For those of you who are familiar with my writing about Alice Bailey, she talks about why in certain aspects of life and people on certain kind of growth levels tread the wheel in order of the signs: Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, etc. And some tread the signs in reverse. For example, Aries, Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn back in reverse. So now we've got Mars going in reverse. And this is kind of a soul-searching thing that's going on. And in the process of doing that soul-searching, we come out in Scorpio, the sign of sex. And the implication of that to me is that there is a concentric relationship between what we think of as spirituality and what we think of as sexuality, and that in a sense, this is the sexual core of a person, and the spiritual layer is kind of wrapped around it as a kind of a disguise or a coating or sometimes a gloss, an excuse, a rationale. You'll notice if you study almost any religion, especially the common version of that religion, that the nature of religion is to deny sex. And they're saying, don't go deeper. This stuff in here is the bad stuff, and we're going to cover it with the good stuff, and you'll go to heaven forever. But if you go in deeper, you'll go to hell forever. And don't believe it, because it really is the big lie. And so what we have here is a journey inward toward, I think, the inherently sexual core of what a person is. Now, this is somewhat controversial, that the inherent core of what a person is, the core of the psyche, is allegedly sexual, but the reality is we all came into the world because some people who we didn't know had sex, and then someone got pregnant, and then you were born. And that's how it happened. And so we could simplify a lot of discussions of your origins and your creation with the simple, basic biological fact that you're made from fucking. And that is something that remains an underlying reality of existence. And most of what we do and like the most has something to do with sex. Every piece of fruit is a sex organ. We're constantly eating the sex organs of plants, and we're eating what is fundamentally a sexual secretion of animals in the form of milk and cheese and butter and all that. We eat a lot of eggs. Those are sexual organs. And so the only way to get away from the fact that sex is at the center of everything is just a denial trip. And you can appease your denial trip by saying, wow, if I think of that, I'm going straight to hell. But how much fun is that? There's much better forms of fun to have. So this is a basic introduction. I'll be developing these themes in my Mars retrograde spring reading. I'll be telling the story of how this influences each of the signs and each of the rising signs. It's got a whole different flavor for each of the signs and rising signs. We find that kind of borderland between the spiritual and the sexual in a different place in everyone's chart, but in all cases, it's going to happen that that Mars begins in Sagittarius and it penetrates backwards into the Scorpionic realm. Mars, of course, that's getting sunny. Mars, of course, is the planet that is the classical ruler of Scorpio. So Mars belongs there, and then Mars is going to station direct in late June and then move forward back into Sagittarius. What we're looking at really, in truth, in reality, is the complete integration of Scorpio and Sagittarius, which is a really exciting thing. I think that it vibrates with this concept of Tantra, which is the inherently erotic quality of existence, and an understanding that there is fundamentally no conflict at all between what we think of as sexual and what we think of as spiritual. They are the same thing, but they are divided for the purposes of business, that business being church oppression, particularly of women. So if you've ever thought it was weird that basically almost all religious teachings wind up with the moral of the story being sex is bad, I'm telling you how it got to be that way. And how it got to be that way is the profit motive and the motive to control people and to basically make them obedient little robots. As someone once said, it's easier to control a village with a priest than it is with an entire regiment of the army, because the priest has a level of psychological control, and most of that psychological control is ill-gotten through guilt. And so I think part of what we're looking at with this is a journey away from this evil, nasty thing that tortures us, known as guilt. All right, thanks for listening. Planet Waves TV and Planet Waves FM are sponsored by our subscribers to Planet Waves, our members, subscribers, reading customers, my clients. All of that money goes to provide you with this, I think, fun stuff that we offer. Some clear-headed, non-moralistic, straightforward, life-affirming astrology. Don't miss Planet Waves FM, where I'll be covering Mars retrograde and some other stuff on outer planets. We've got a good discussion going of the 1960s Uranus-Pluto conjunction, but I'm going to be developing this into the history of conjunctions involving Eris, which is also happening right now. Mentioned it last week. I'll be back with more of the Uranus-Eris conjunction on Planet Waves FM and the next edition of Planet Waves TV. Thanks for listening. Pleasure, as always.